Madam Speaker. I'll be sharing my time with the member from Sherwood Park, Fort Saskatchewan. And Madam Speaker, I'm honoured to represent the people of Renfrew-Nipissing-Pembroke. I participate in this debate to share their concern about the deteriorating state of the finances of the Canadian government and what that means to average middle-class Canadian families who bear the brunt of bad spending. Everyone knows today's deficit budgets are tomorrow's tax increases. Borrowing money to pay for borrowed time only works for so long, as the disgraced Premier of Ontario is about to find out when she faces the Ford Nation. I take this time before I continue to thank the members of the Conservative Party of Renfrew-Nipissing-Pembroke for their overwhelming vote of confidence in once again confirming that I will be our party's candidate in the next federal election, an election that cannot come soon enough for the overburdened taxpayers of this country. Hear, hear. The democratic nomination process in my riding of Renfrew-Nipissing-Pembroke, which coincided with the delivery of this disastrous federal budget, attracted individuals who previously had been identified as supporting the Liberal Party. This is a reflection of how badly they want to see the government defeated. It speaks volumes that former prominent Liberals publicly supported my nomination as the Conservative Party candidate for the next election. That anti-Liberal sentiment includes the Liberal candidate who ran against me in the 2015 election, a veteran. He condemns the Liberal Party on social media for using him as a party prop in a picture during the election with no intention of honoring any promises made to veterans for their votes. It looks like the Prime Minister's party will be looking for a new candidate. Here's what he had to say. 3 years ago, I decided to seek the nomination for the federal Liberal candidacy in Renfrew-Nipissing-Pembroke. My only goal was to play a role in assuring that no other brave Canadian would be penalized at home due to their service. I was inspired by promises to fix things. I was inspired by the presence of other veterans lining up to win nominations for the Liberals. I legitimately felt hopeful for the first time in a long time. I believed them. I now realize I was wrong. The Prime Minister recently stated that Canadian veterans want more than Canada can give. I stood on a stage behind the Prime Minister in August 2015 when he made a promise to veterans, a promise which was obviously, in retrospect, a political bargaining chip. I have first-hand experience as a service member, stakeholder, and party member with respect to the way our military is regarded and treated. At some of the highest levels, I have personally witnessed the way in which our injured and ill are regarded with skepticism, suspicion, and cynicism by members of the governing party. It needs to end now. And that's the end of quote, Madam Speaker. This budget is a huge disappointment, not only to veterans, but currently serving members of Canada's armed forces and their families. Canada has returned to the days known as the Decade of Darkness that passed for Canadian defence policy. The policy decision by the last Liberal government to interfere in the equipment procurement process with the decision to cancel the EH-101 helicopter contract cost the lives of Canadian soldiers in Afghanistan. This marked the beginning of the decade of darkness for serving members of the Canadian Armed Forces. The similar political decision to buy used junk from the Australians, most reasonable Canadians know, can only end just as badly. That decision marks the return of darkness for our military members. To get an idea of how poorly the budgetary policy of this government treats men and women in uniform, I draw attention to a new tax measure that targets military families. On average, about 15,500 members of the Canadian Armed Forces and 2,200 members of the RCMP, along with their families, have been authorized each year to receive relocation services. To quote this government's own propaganda, military families are the strength behind the uniform. Family members of Canadian Armed Forces personnel share in the stresses and strains resulting in the deployment of their loved ones to dangerous operational duty and the prolonged separations they entail. They also make important sacrifices and face challenges associated with frequent relocations, such as finding new family health care providers, reestablishing daycare, moving children between schools and education systems, professional licensing, and dealing with inconveniences such as changing drivers and vehicle licenses when moving between provinces. They must also deal with the financial instability resulting from frequent moves, whether it be the loss of employment, different tax systems, or changes to post-living differentials. Members in uniform are only now just finding out, or will get a rude surprise in the mail come tax time, that effective December 1st, 2017, the posting allowance will now be taxable. Members will no longer be able to roll the posting allowance into RRSPs or buy down their mortgage rate. This announcement is the Minister of Finance's and the Minister of Defense's idea of a comprehensive military family plan. The posting allowance was incorporated into the Integrated Relocation Program, or IRP, as a non-taxable posting benefit as a result of a recommendation from the Standing Committee on National Defense and Veterans Affairs made in their report, Moving Forward, a Strategic Plan for Quality of Life Improvements. I remember when this change was made. I was a newly elected member of Parliament and a new member of the Defense Committee when this change was coming into effect. At that time, there was all-party agreement for this change. I was pleased to support replacing the posting allowance that existed at that time with a new non-taxable posting benefit to adequately compensate all personnel for the disruption caused by new postings. As the Member of Parliament whose riding includes Garrison Petawawa, the largest Army base in Canada, I've been made only too familiar with the financial stress placed on military families when a soldier is posted. I can tell this House that when members of the Canadian Armed Forces have found out about this new Liberal policy to tax posting allowances, the reaction goes from disbelief to outrage. The Auditor General has clearly outlined the growing gap between the total number of regular force members who are needed, including the underrepresentation of women, and the inability of this government to recruit, train, and keep in uniform Canadians to fill that gap. Why is this Prime Minister so insensitive to military families? Why has this Prime Minister refused to consider this anti-family policy as a barrier to recruitment, retention, and gender equality? And most importantly, why has the Minister of Defense done nothing to protect those who he used to serve alongside? It's hard to believe that the Minister of Defense would support taxing soldiers this way. But for this Liberal spending government, taxing a Canadian has a higher priority than protecting Canadians. Only in a Liberal spending government is the Revenue Minister more powerful than the Defense Minister. It's clear the Minister of Defense cannot defend the women and men who defend Canada from being this Prime Minister's next tax target. We need a Minister of Defense who will fight for the Canadian forces. That's why I will be inviting all Canadians to go to cherylgallant.com/posting tax. From that webpage, they will be able to send a letter to the Minister of Defense and their local MP to express their opposition to the posting allowance tax. If members on the opposite side of this House hear enough from their own constituents, they may find the courage to fight the posting allowance tax. That's my hope, Madam Speaker, that Liberals will start listening to what's going on out there. There's a rising level of anger and frustration with a federal government that's out of touch with regular Canadians. The pre-budget decision to target people of faith for their personal beliefs has angered people of all religions. Many small business owners and doctors have told me they will never vote for the Liberal Party. Canadian veterans feel particularly betrayed by an aloof Prime Minister when he tells veterans he does not recognize their sacrifices. There are millions of dollars to give to a convicted terrorist, however, no money for the victims of roadside bombs. The posting allowance is just the latest example of how Liberals will continue to sneak in new taxes on regular Canadians. All this anger and this Liberal spendthrift government only offers more of the same. The 2018 borrowing binge budget is filled with bad spending and higher taxes. Canadians deserve a balanced budget, smarter spending, and lower taxes. Canadians deserve a conservative government. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Questions and comments? Questions et commentaires? The honourable member for Selkirk. Selkirk Interlake Eastman.
Well, thank you, Madam Speaker, and I want to thank my friend from Pembroke, Renfrew-Nipissing-Pembroke for her excellent speech and for standing up for our brave men and women in the Canadian Armed Forces, and to point out the folly of the government in taxing our troops and taking away special benefits for those that are also serving but are injured in the line of service and are unable to return to duty within 6 months, lose their special benefits and allowances. Now, in this budget, Madam Speaker, and I know my colleague for her long service on the National Defence Committee is well aware that this budget was mute on the entire Department of National Defence. There's less than a paragraph dedicated to national defence. There is no plan on how taxpayers' money is being used to fund procurement and activities of our Canadian Armed Forces. And I'd ask that she comment on what that represents, the shameful nature of this government, of the Liberals, not standing up for our troops and failing Canadians on transparency and providing the strategy and the plan on how we're going to actually implement strong, secure, and engage the Liberals' defence policy.
The member for Renfrew-Nipissing-Pembroke.
Thank you to my honourable colleague, the member from Selkirk Interlake. And certainly the promise we received of transparency during the last election certainly has not materialized. The government doesn't know the difference between transparency and being invisible. Barely a word in the budget on national defense reflects how low regard the government has for the National Armed Forces. And there has to be a plan somewhere. Somebody has to have the fiscal framework. They have to be going by a budget somewhere. What we're looking for is an actual document showing what the spending is for the military, and we haven't seen that yet, Madam Speaker. That's an insult to all Canadians.
And comments? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Public Services and Procurement.
Amazing to hear lessons, Madam Speaker, from the Conservatives on defence and defence procurement and respect for our troops. When you had a former minister being chased down the hall by a veteran's widow. When you have now today a defence white paper, strong, secure, and engaged, with a fully costed $62 billion plan to put planes in the sky, to put boats in the water, to equip our men and women in uniform with the very materiel, the very equipment that was denied to them for 10 long, lonely, dark years of the Harper administration.
Thank God that's over.
It's ironic to watch members over there twist themselves in knots saying that we're spending too much and then wake up and suggest that we should spend the billions of dollars they didn't spend on defense procurement during their 10 long, sad years in office. What we have now is a plan to put planes in the air, a plan to christen and send boats out to sea, and a plan to maintain and upgrade the equipment of our men and women in uniform. How could the member from Renfrew-Nipissing-Pembroke have missed that this is the biggest spending defence budget in the history of Canada?
Yeah.
The Honourable Member for Renfrew-Nipissing-Pembroke.
Speaker, the member opposite has plans to buy this, buy that, but we actually bought. We got a fleet of C-130s. We got the C-17s, and they're so used now, it's difficult to keep enough pilots in the program to keep them flying. We bought new Lavs. We had new Coyotes, and just a couple weeks ago, we launched a new supply ship, one that was uniquely procured, a combination of civilian and military working together. Very unique situation. We've needed that supply ship, and we've got it in the water now, and they'll be on their way right shortly to continue on exercises in the Pacific.
Here, here.